It's almost Thanksgiving. Is it too early to talk about the Indianapolis 500? Absolutely not. So in this video, we're going to talk about the potential car driver combinations that will be in the 105th running of the Indianapolis 500. The last few years, of course, 2020 notwithstanding, we've seen an increase in car count, which has led to bumping in the Indy 500 and the qualification drama that comes with that. With an expansion in several teams for the full season, or at least a partial season for next year, I think the chances of a bump day are very good. Now, this video will focus exclusively on the Indy 500. If you want a broader sense of the IndyCar silly season and where that's headed, I uploaded a video last week on the IndyCar silly season, and I think that one is a great video if you want to really get in deep with some of the rumors and speculation about where some of the drivers that are on the driver market right now may be headed. This video in particular will focus much more on teams and cars, as the Indy 500 has a unique rule set in which the car qualifies for the race and not the driver. Now, let's set some expectations, because I think that's very important when talking about this, because a lot of these car combinations that I will be talking about for 2021 potentially may not happen. So how many cars can we expect? Well, like I said, we've seen an increase, generally speaking, in terms of the entry list in the last few years. 2018 saw 35 car and driver combinations, and the spread of the field was 16 Chevrolets and 19 Hondas. 2019 saw a one car increase to 36 car driver combinations with an even split of 18 Chevrolets and 18 Hondas. 2020, of course, fell back to 33 entries, just barely filling the field. Of course, I think that was a lot more shutdown related than anything. The field breakdown was 17 Chevrolets and 16 Hondas. So as we stand right now in 2021, I have it at a possible 38 car driver combinations that could possibly show up for the Indy 500. Now, that is absolutely pipe dream, pie in the sky, absolutely everything working out perfectly for that number to happen. I think it's much more likely we will see a 2018 or 2019 number of 35 to 36 entries. But again, as I have it marked right now, that 38 cars would be 18 Chevrolets and 20 Hondas. Now, the Hondas have been behind the Chevys recently in terms of entries. Almost certainly the Hondas will have the most cars in the field next year because several of the full season teams have expanded on the Honda side of things. Now, that being said, a few of the Chevy teams have expanded as well. We could possibly have the 2019 split, which would be 18 Chevys and 18 Hondas, which would be probably ideal from the perspective of distributing the labor and work the best. Now, like I said at the beginning, we will be focusing on cars a lot, but there's one unique exception, and that is a driver who potentially has a sponsor lined up, but really isn't attached to any particular ride at this point, and that is Stefan Wilson, who has gotten in contact on Twitter recently in a very public display with Marcus Lemonis of Camping World fame. Now, generally speaking, Marcus Lemonis does not express interest in sponsoring anything that he doesn't follow through with. Lemonis has expressed interest in sponsoring Stefan Wilson at the 2021 Indianapolis 500, but again, it's very early stages. Stefan's a very hard worker. I suspect he will be on the grid next year, and certainly I think in the comment section we should be speculating about which team he may be going to if this Camping World deal does indeed come through for the Indy 500. All right, let's break the 38 potential cars down. Really easy to start out with are the teams that are already locked in with their drivers and cars. Penske, 4 cars. Joseph Newgarden, Will Power, Simon Pagenaud, Scott McLaughlin. Of course, McLaughlin's a rookie in IndyCar racing, very accomplished in the Supercars Championship, the defending champion of that particular series. Chip Ganassi Racing is also locked in at 4 cars, so the biggest Honda team and the biggest Chevy team, each 4 cars. Ganassi's got Scott Dixon, Alex Palou, Marcus Ericsson, and just confirmed officially today, Tony Kanaan will drive the Jimmy Johnson number 48 with Bryant Cooling, Heating and Cooling sponsorship, and NTT Data for the next 2 years. So Tony Kanaan locked into that team for the next 2 years, and Ganassi locked in at 4 cars for the 2021 Indy 500. We go over to Andretti Autosport. This is always an interesting team for the Indy 500 because they usually expand at least 1 car for this race. As of right now, we have confirmation that Alexander Rossi, Colton Herta, Ryan Hunter-Reay, Marco Andretti, and while it's not officially confirmed, I can confirm this to you that James Hinchcliffe is absolutely going to be on this team next year. There is a potential space available. Like I said, a 6th car from this team. Traditionally, they do enter an extra car. We'll see how high the car count. It's usually dependent on car count. Michael Andretti is usually not one to risk getting potentially a car bumped. But there were some rumblings that maybe a Ryan Norman, who is an Indy Lights driver for Andretti Autosport, might have an opportunity at the Indy 500. That's been a while ago, though, and I don't know how far down the road those talks ever got. But that's definitely a driver who is attached to Andretti Autosport and the Indy 500 at one point, though I would also imagine that Stefan Wilson, if he were to come up with a sponsorship, particularly from Camping World, that this would be a landing spot. He performed very well for Andretti Autosport when he drove for them in the 2018 Indianapolis 500, so that's another driver that could potentially fill the 6th Andretti seat. Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan Racing always enters 3 cars, and it looks like they are going to be having a 3rd car for a lot of this season coming up, which is a good thing for car count across the series. But in terms of the Indy 500, I think it's going to be 3 cars. Of course, Graham Rahal and defending champion Takuma Sato, no surprise there. The 3rd car, there's quite a few different drivers who could take this one. Spencer Pigot is one. Antonio Felix da Costa, Formula E champion, is another one. And we could always be surprised, but I think the not surprising thing would be Rahal entering a 3rd car in the 500. Meyer Shank Racing. Now this is where things get a little bit interesting because I have heard they could potentially enter 3 cars in the Indianapolis 500, which is a bit surprising, but again, that's what I'm hearing, and so we'll just kind of see how it goes. They have also purchased the car from Dragon Speed, the chassis from Dragon Speed. So Dragon Speed is no longer associated with IndyCar, at least at this time, so they will definitely not have an entry. That entry has gone to Helio Castroneves, who of course will be joining Jack Harvey at Meyer Shank Racing. That has been confirmed. Now the 3rd car, from what I am hearing, is going to be an entry by Jackie Heinricher. And if you don't know who that is a team owner from the IMSA series who had a partnership with Michael Shank in IMSA with the GT3 Acuras. Apparently, she is focusing her entire energy and effort. That's public information from Racer.com, who had a story with her, on getting a female driver into the Indianapolis 500. My understanding at this time that would this happen, would this take place, she would be partnering with the Meyer Shank Racing team and running a 3rd car and potentially a few more races in the Helio Castroneves car when Castroneves is not driving. Now, qualified female drivers to run the Indianapolis 500 and get a 3rd car up to speed, you're looking at a pretty short list. That's either Pippa Mann, who I think would be unlikely in this scenario, or the more likely scenario would be Catherine Legg, who has driven for both Shank and Heinricher in the past, and I think that she would be the prime candidate for this particular ride with all of the stipulations and the history with the team owners. If there's a 3rd car from Shank, it'll be Catherine Legg. Arrow McLaren SP. This is always going to be an interesting one because Zach Brown usually likes to... I should start calling him Hollywood Brown because he loves the spotlight. Pato Award, Felix Rosenquist, those 2 drivers are already confirmed. They've been talking pretty seriously about running a 3rd Indy 500 car. Now, who is that going to be? It's really up in the air. I think it's a lot dependent on whether or not they have a driver who can bring funding to potentially bring that car to a partial or full season for next year. I think if it's just a one-off, I've always speculated that it's going to end up being Juan Pablo Montoya. But again, we'll have to see. But I think you can probably lock in McLaren for 3 cars. Ed Carpenter Racing, they are always fast at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and I think you're going to see a very similar assault to last year's. Rinus VeeKay already re-signed with the team. Ed Carpenter, obviously he's the team owner, loves racing at the Indy 500. Don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Now I have the third car as to be announced, or TBA, right now. More likely than not, that's going to be Connor Daly. I think that's really just dependent on sponsorship at this point. And even if Air Force doesn't renew, I think there's a very high possibility that Ed will still go with Connor Daly in the third Indy 500 car. I think it would be unlikely to see any other driver at Ed Carpenter Racing in 2021. Dale Coyne Racing. Now you're going to see a lot of to be announced here because he has announced none of his drivers for next year. Traditionally, Dale Coyne enters 3 cars in the Indy 500, 2 from his own personal stable, and usually a third that's associated with an outside team. Now, last year that was Rick Ware and the BYRD brothers. It's up in the air whether or not that will continue or spin off as its own team right now. So right now, we've got 3 seats at Coyne that are unfilled. Almost certainly Santino Ferrucci will return to that seat in the lead driver role. Who knows what's going to happen with the other 2, but as of right now, I would bet on at least 2 cars from Coyne and more than likely 3. AJ Foyt Racing. Traditionally, again, a team that enters 3 cars at the Indy 500. Right now, the only driver that's confirmed is Sebastian Bourdais, confirmed for a full season, got the leader circle money in St. Petersburg. The other 2 cars, unconfirmed as of right now, but I think it's very likely that Charlie Kimball and Dalton Kellett would get those seats, so that team would stay relatively the same to it did last year, just replace Tony Kanaan with Sebastian Bourdais. Of course, Kanaan going over to Ganassi, and Bourdais filling that seat for this year. CARLIN Racing. This is another one which is kind of weird because they've entered in the past as many as 3 cars. Really, in 2019, they entered 4 if you count the McLaren Fernando Alonso entry. I would probably bet against them entering that many cars again. It seems like Trevor Carlin is set on having 2 full-time entries in IndyCar next year, and I would assume that he will probably get that done. Now, while it's unconfirmed, it seems like Max Chilton would be a lock to be one of the cars coming from CARLIN Racing for the Indy 500. He ran as their only entry in this year's race, and then potentially a Felipe Nasr would be the second driver at CARLIN Racing, but you never know. There could be another surprise. It could be another oval driver, or they could partner with a smaller team to enter a second car. But I think CARLIN Racing, I would lean likely to them having a 2-car assault next year at the Indy 500. Indy 500 only team, well, actually they're expanding a little bit in recent years, but DREYER and REINBOLD Racing. Now I've got them down as a 2-car entry that's both to be announced. But if recent history is anything to go off of, those 2 drivers will be Sage Karam and J.R. Hildebrand. Generally speaking, DREYER and REINBOLD doesn't look outside of those 2 drivers. Those 2 drivers are solid. They always qualify, and particularly Hildebrand seems to race really well and get them good finishes near or in the top 10. So I would imagine that they'll stick with the Hildebrand, Karam 1-2 punch, and you'll see 2 cars from DREYER and REINBOLD next year. Now here's where we get into shaky ground. The last 3 teams I have on my list, and Rick Ware Racing with the BYRD brothers is one of them. There have been conflicting reports on what's going on with Rick Ware Racing and IndyCar. There's anything from they're going to run a full season to they're just leasing a car to try to get some sponsorship to run some races. They've haven't bought a car from Coyne. They have brought a car from Coyne. We're going to, at this point, put them as a separate team, though it's certainly possible that they could link back up with Coyne, assuming that they have not purchased the car from Dale. And while the driver space is to be announced, if indeed, like I've heard, the BYRD brothers are associated with this, almost certainly it would be James Davison as the driver. So, again, this is one that I'm kind of shaky on because I don't know if Rick Ware is seriously going to do their own IndyCar thing separate from Dale Coyne, but again, we'll have to see. Currently marked down as a separate team. JUNCOS Racing. Yes, the Fernando Alonso Slayers from 2019. They haven't made a lot of noise recently about running a potential Indy 500 program. They've really been focused, at least recently in the media, talking about running an expanded Road to Indy program, heading back up to Indy Lights with at least Stingray Robb for next year, the Indy Pro 2000 champion. Now, they did recently sell their Cadillac DPI to Chip Ganassi Racing. Now, whether that means they have any kind of a budget to go Indy 500 racing, I wouldn't be the first one to presume that means they're absolutely confirmed. Pre-pandemic last year, they were making a lot of noise that they wanted to enter the 2020 race. Obviously, that kind of got nixed naturally because everybody was kind of hurting for cash between May and August and all the time that it would have taken to get an entry together. But I wouldn't put it past Ricardo JUNCOS. The guy seems to be a miracle worker when he wants to do something, wants to get something done. So if this entry is on the entry list, you would almost certainly imagine that it would be Kyle Kaiser once again, though it's certainly possible that they could find a driver with funding, get them in there, and make it to the grid. And finally, the shakiest of all shaky ground is Top Gun Racing. Now, I do have a driver confirmed here because Top Gun Racing claimed this year, when they were planning on entering the 500 this year, that R.C. Anderson would be their driver. That never materialized. Then there was some talk that they might do the final few races of the year. That never materialized. So I would be very skeptical about Top Gun Racing potentially becoming a real thing, but I will list them regardless because if they do happen, that's an extra car, though I would almost speculate that they might try to associate with another team or affiliate with another team like a CARLIN Racing, and maybe that's a path for CARLIN Racing or Foyt or Coyne to get an extra car on the grid. We'll just have to see, and of course, if the money's green, someone will find a way to spend it, and I think that's my opinion of Top Gun Racing as we stand right now. Alright, so that's me poking, prodding, and scraping to get to an Indy 500 entry list as we stand right now in the month of November. What do you think about this? Which entries do you think are going to happen? Which seats do you think are going to be filled? Which seats do you not think will be filled? Do you think I'm full of crap? Do you think there's absolutely no way of bumping next year? Do you think it'll be only 33 cars or possibly less? As we stand right now, I have 22 car driver combinations that are absolutely confirmed for next year's Indy 500. Beyond that, who knows? You need to at least find 11 to fill the grid, and then beyond that, it's all gravy. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more IndyCar and Indy 500 related content, and I will see you in the next video.